My mission president was actually Samuel Boren, was actually there only for a few months, and then he was replaced by Presidente Lotito, who was actually an Italian. And their mission presidency style was completely different from each other. It was an interesting dichotomy between the two. Whereas Samuel Boren was very kind of warm and friendly, and every time we'd have an interview, he would ask about family and how are they doing and how are you doing and so forth and so on. President Lotito was much more of a strict. He was more strict. He was. He didn't really want to bring up your family because he felt like that would cause you to be, more trunky or whatever, and that kind of stuff. And it was pretty much down to business with him. And it was just kind of an interesting thing. But he was there. He was one of the first actually Italian mission presidents, I think. And at the time there was 4 different missions. There was the Catania mission down in the south. There was the Rome mission, the Milan mission, and then the Padova mission. And then the Milan and Padova missions had combined together right after pretty quickly after I came out there, was on the mission. But the church in general, it was struggling. There was, the one of the bigger branches of the church. There was no stake at the time, and so one of the bigger branches of the church was there in Milan when I was first stationed. And there would probably be about 30 to 40 people there on an average Sunday. They didn't have the church building was not a separate building. It was actually a floor in a palazzo, and that was one of the things that was hard to really deal with coming, this country boy, all of a sudden, there's, except for a few parks here and there, everything was paved, everything, the way that they would do it in Italy is that there's kind of like a block area, and all around on that block, that all the stores, from bread stores to, for milk and all kinds of different things, whatever kind of food you want, would pretty much be all the way around on the first floor right there on the street level. But then there would be doorways that would go in where you go in and go up and down to the elevators and that kind of stuff. And then so people lived up above where the stores were at. So people didn't really need to travel, and most people didn't own a car at that point in time. There was enough cars that at night they would be just packed, and I don't know how they ever got the cars in and out of these places. And they have these little cars, and they're amazing drivers because, the lines on the road, they were pretty much just ignored. If you can fit through, you go. It's kind of a fun way to do that. But of course, we didn't have, as missionaries, only the assistants of the president had cars. Everyone else used the mass transit system or bicycles. When we got out to my third area was Piacenza, and then we had a place out in the Paese, which is basically the rural area, and we actually rode bikes into town, and that was kind of a fun place there. So there's you'll find probably on most missions that's going to be the case. You'll have some in the city, maybe, and some out in the rural. Just depends on your mission. There's a couple of congregations down in Rome and so forth, but Milan, actually, we had the first stake in Italy in the Milan mission, and that stake was formed while I was there. About 6 months before I came home, the first stake in Milano was organized, and so we had the first ward. So actually, it's kind of funny because when I first came into the mission, and I was stationed there in downtown Milan area, I was about my last 2 months of my mission. I was actually transferred back into the same area, and it was pretty cool to see. Now it went from branch to being a ward, and it had pretty amazing growth. There was probably about 70 to 80 people, maybe 90 people coming then. They actually had gotten a bigger space. Some of the other branches had actually been able to purchase, a building that was actually a standalone building. And I actually got to see one of my first people that I was involved with their conversion And that's kind of a fun story right there too. But we were tracking. Most of the tracking that we were doing back in those days, we would try to get into the palazzos, and then we'd just go up and start ringing the doorbells. But down at the bottom they always have a ring system, basically, of buttons, and the door was always locked. So in order to get in, you had to get somebody to let you in, which means you had to ring somebody in the building, and then they would have to hit a electronic button, basically, and it would unlock the door, and then you could come in. Well, obviously they didn't necessarily always want missionaries to be in there, so we sometimes had to just hang out there and wait until somebody came in or out, and then hurry and grab the door before it closed, and go in and go start tracking. But one of those times when we were tracking, we were, there'd be usually 2 doors on each level. And then you go down some stairs, and there'd be 2 more doors, and then go down some more stairs, and there'd be 2 more doors, for example. And this one time we knocked on a couple of doors up there, in an upper level. And it's so funny because a lot of times people would come to the door, and they would have, like, seriously, sometimes they would have 5 or 6 different locks. And you'd hear them unlocking, and chinking in a chain or something or other. It's just like, it actually would have probably been easier to come through the wall than come through that door. But anyway, but a lot of times they would just say, they would call out and just say, "Non ce nessuno," which means there's nobody here. I always just thought that was so funny because they're saying it through the door. There's nobody here, anyway. But so we were doing this tracting, and we just gotten through a couple of doors where nobody answered and so forth, and so we kind of we didn't want to stand and wait there for 4 or 5 minutes to see if someone was going to come to the door. If they didn't come to the door pretty soon, then we'd just move to the next door. So we just done one door on the same level. We walked over to the second door, and we're knocking on that door, and then somebody came to that door. But then the first door, they kind of opened it up enough to where it hit the end of the chain, because it was this chain that opens up about this far. And this lady looks out, and she goes, "Who is it?" I mean, not in English, but in Italian. And we kind of like, "Oh, okay." And then the other guy basically said, "Oh, missionaries," slammed the door. And so we walked over to this lady, and she said, "Well, what are you doing?" And we said, "Well, we have a message of Jesus Christ we'd like to share with you." And she says, "Okay, just a minute." She closes the door and undoes the chain, and then she opened the door. She says, "Well, come in." And I was like, wow. I mean, because this really did not happen very often, So we came in, and so forth. We shared a message with her, and as we got talking, she says, "Well, you know why I let you in, don't you?" And we said, "No." And she says, "Well, my daughter, about 8 years old, 7 or 8 years old," she says, "my daughter actually went to the door when she heard the door ringing. Or I can't remember if we rang or knocked, but anyway, and she came to the door, and she looked at the little peephole, and she came running over to me, and she said, 'Mom, there's 2 angels. They have a message for you.'" And she says, "2 angels? What are you talking about?" So I came to the door, and I looked, and it's you missionaries, but her daughter insisted that what she saw were angels. And so we actually were able to go in and talk to her sister Lanza, and so we taught her lessons for most of the rest of the time while I was there, and I was transferred, and then she was baptized about a month or so after that. And then so when I came back at the very end of my mission, she and her daughter had been baptized and so forth, and they were still stalwarts in the gospel, and it was pretty cool. That was pretty neat.